First question. So the Delta variant of the coronavirus has proven tougher to eliminate than first thought due to it being more contagious than the previous variants. And COVID restrictions have been accelerated in the hope of returning life to normal. Till it comes under control, New South Wales will have its lockdown extended. Do you think lockdowns at the moment are the right way to deal with this pandemic?
Well, firstly, if we look at the evidence from overseas, and we're in a fortunate position that we do have a lot of evidence from overseas that we can study, and different countries have tried different approaches. And almost universally, the agreements appear to be that any of the studies that have looked at this, that lockdowns have little effect. I'm yet to see any study that shows that a lockdown is effective. Often you are just delaying what can often be the inevitable. But the real concern that I have here for us in Australia, there seems to be no proper cost-benefit analysis of what these lockdowns are. Okay, firstly, we know we're trying to achieve suppression of the Delta variant, a reduction in hospitalizations, and a reduction in deaths from people that contract the Delta variant. That's the goal, what we're trying to do. Okay, what are the costs on the cost side? Now, as I said, I've yet to see anyone, a single piece of paper that actually does a proper analysis. Now, what are the costs? Firstly, you're looking at enormous psychological and mental distress across society. The scenes of troops on the streets in Western Sydney, with a lot of people that have fled countries where they're used to seeing troops on the street, and I dismiss the stress that's going to cause. And how do you measure that? Not to mention the increase the effects this is having on mental health. We've seen data that suicides and self-harm is up significantly because of this period. What's the economic cost? Before, remember when the lockdown we were having was basically in the retail sector. So the JobKeeper, which was all borrowed money, remember every cent of that JobKeeper money was borrowed, has to be repaid. We basically saw just simply a realignment of retail expenditure where homeware stores were, and the Bunnings of the world and the big supermarkets increased their sales, as where the smaller restaurants, smaller cafes, smaller businesses lost their sales. So the retail spending didn't really change that much, but this time with this lockdown, especially here in Sydney, we're actually attacking the supply side. So when all those building sites close down, that goes back through the entire supply chain. The people that supply the cement, back to the forestry workers that supply the timber for the chipboard. All through the supply chain has enormous effect. And it's not going to have this second lockdown that we're having is going to have a lot worse economic effects. What's the cost to the entrepreneurial society, where we're seeing so many people in small business having their life savings wiped out, everything they've worked and earned for, often over generations to build a business up, are being destroyed. What's the cost there? What's the cost to society of the breakdown of the relationship between the police and the citizens? We've seen that, especially in Victoria, and that's happening in New South Wales. We had those farcical scenes of yesterday with helicopters in the air with someone like yelling out from a loud hailer, like something you'd expect to see in Australia in the movie 1984. A successful society needs a great relationship between the police and the citizens. And you see where countries don't have that, like many South American countries, where Central South American countries, where the citizens are actually frightened of the police. You don't have the same quality of life and same quality of society. And we've seen a real breakdown of that relationship. So my concern is that when we add all these things up, that the costs of these lockdowns will be far, far greater, by many times multiple, than what the benefits are that we are going to achieve. Just like when people get postponing operations and diagnoses, are getting a diagnosis for all sorts of diseases in hospital. What's the cost of that to society? All those things you've got to actually sit down, put them on a piece of paper. Now, not only do I think that they're going to show that the costs are much greater, but when I see our Premier and the Chief Health Officer talk about these things, I don't think they've got even a clue that they have to look at this evidence and make a consideration on that benefit. They seem to have this single laser-like focus on we must crush the cases, and that's all they're concerned about, without having a concern about all the other effects and costs that will have.
Just quickly on that, do you think the reason why they're focusing entirely on the cases and not any of the other concerns you've mentioned, do you think they're doing that because they believe that's what the voters want them to focus on?
I think it's partly that reason, but that's not what a good government does. If you govern by polls and you continue to follow the polls, you're a bad government and you'll eventually get caught out and you'll be voted out of office. I think part of it is a lot of these things are unseen. So you don't actually see at the moment, okay, what are the costs to society of people not going to their doctors and not getting diagnosed with treatments as they otherwise would? Now you should be able to do some calculations of what it actually is on paper, but that's not being seen. So all these things are, well, what's the great, as Bastidia, the great economist, he says there's the seen and the unseen. It's the unseen that is not being looked at and I think assessed properly. I think also the media has a lot to blame for this. We're hearing this, the daily numbers, the daily case numbers, the 11 o'clock press conference. What's the number of new infections? Everyone's waiting on that number. Those things are just making it very difficult. And this is why I think we're lacking strong leadership that can put that aside and say, okay, we need to sit down and we need to make an informed decision based on all the costs and based on all the benefits. And that's clearly not happening.
It's more than just not happening. It's not even being communicated with the public. Like that conversation just isn't happening. I wanted to ask, unless it's changed today, the Sutherland Shire hasn't actually had a new case in a couple of days. And I live in Hughes myself.
Yes. And
we're going to be locked down for another month. What's the effect on businesses and families in this time?
And not to forget students. What the effect on students? What's the effect on taking so many people out of school and education and learning for such a long period of time? I've seen studies on that had catastrophic effects going forward. You up at Menai Marketplace in Hughes, which is the Woolworths is open and doing a roaring trade, but all the other businesses are really struggling, and most of the other businesses are closed. So the clothing shops, the homeware shops that are there, all closed down. So what's this doing? And the building sites across Sydney. So if you're actually working on a building, okay, the building sites are still going in Hughes. Now why would you close those building sites down and then open them up later on? Was just a bizarre decision. But anyway, if you're working, and a lot of the tradies I know do live in Hughes, the building sites in Western Sydney are all basically closed. So these guys have got no work. It's just, to me, it's a clear example of not a proper, a thorough cost-benefit analysis being done. And even if we talk about it, we can argue about, what the numbers are and where they should be. But there's no discussion on this at the moment whatsoever, which is very, very concerning.